Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Okay. Hey guys. So, two nuclear nations almost are kind of going to war, but I believe they signed a ceasefire. So that's good, but still extremely scary. I actually watched hey guys, how's it going? Hope everyone's doing well. I watched two really good documentaries a few days ago that one explained more in depth the entire history of from British colonial India to the partition, or to them leaving and then the partition going up to modern day, and then another one going more in detail about the wars themselves since that India and Pakistan have engaged against each other. So I've definitely got a lot. I got a lot of background that I didn't have from those videos. I still don't know about a lot about the current conflict, so that's what I'm trying to learn about right now. Let's go. Preemptive like the India-Pakistan crisis, enduring threats, hard lessons, war fronts. Let's go. Original link, top of the description. Let's learn.
India and Pakistan have averted an all-out war, or at least for the time being they have, after a horrific terror attack in the disputed region of Kashmir and 4 consecutive days of fighting. It seemed as if these two nuclear nations were on the brink of mutually assured destruction. Now, a few days later, the crisis has ended as quickly as it began. But as the dust settles in South Asia, the world is coming to realize that this crisis is not over at all. Instead, the long and hostile relationship between India and Pakistan has transitioned into a new phase. Now, even in times of relative peace, the prospect of nuclear war will be more acute than ever, and one wrong move by either side could put the entire region back on a knife's edge. At the same time, world nations will be racing to learn everything they can from this crisis, to understand just what it looks like when nuclear nations face off in the 21st century, meaning that this 4-day exchange between India and Pakistan may well have made the world more dangerous for everybody. This is the India-Pakistan crisis in the immediate aftermath, the brittle ceasefire holding the region in check, the long list of potential catastrophes that could restart the fighting, and the global ramifications of a crisis without equal in the modern day. As the sun rose over South Asia on...
Just want to say, again, from those videos I watched, I had no idea. I knew about the partition of India, about the creation of India and then Bangladesh, or it was East and West Pakistan, and then Bangladesh. I had no idea. I knew it was going to be bad, right? I didn't know it was that horrific. Some estimates of up to millions of people dying. I had no idea it was that insane.
On May the 10th, 2025, it rose over a region that could have annihilated itself by nightfall. That was the 4th day of the crisis between India and Pakistan, and by noontime in New Delhi and Islamabad, it was abundantly clear that day 4 was the moment of truth. To that point, the crisis had been escalating, from the terror attack on tourists in the Kashmiri resort town of Pahalgam in late April, to a mess of suspended treaties, diplomatic brawls, and statements of condemnation, to a first few days of armed exchange that saw both nations launch long-range strikes and fire off artillery across Kashmir's line of control. But until then, both sides had left room for de-escalation. Pakistan had shot down Indian fighter jets, India had destroyed Pakistani air defense systems, and both sides used unmanned drones, but piloted aircraft had been kept on everybody's respective sides of the border. India had hit several targets across Pakistan, but they were tied to terrorist groups. Pakistan had launched missiles toward Indian cities, but the cities were near the border, and the missiles were dealt with by Indian air defenses. There was still time to wind everything down, with each side accepting a shiny black eye in exchange for the satisfaction of knowing that they'd gotten their own hits in during the brief and violent exchange. But on the 4th day, the complexion of the conflict changed in a major way. India launched a series of missile strikes against Pakistani cities, including Rawalpindi, Lahore, and the nation's capital, Islamabad, along with several large air bases. Pakistan retaliated almost immediately, combining an attack on New Delhi and multiple air bases with a cyber attack against the Indian government and its satellite assets, as heavy fighting broke out all across the line of control in Kashmir. India volleyed back another round of strikes and claimed to have heavily damaged several air bases in the process. In the span of just a few hours, both sides had greenlit far more extensive strikes against both military and civilian targets than had been seen before, in an action that would have clearly indicated in most global conflicts that a far more devastating exchange was on the horizon. But in the case of India and Pakistan, history took a very different turn. In the late afternoon hours, local time in both nations, media outlets began to report that the President of the United States, Donald Trump, seemed to think that the two nations had entered a ceasefire. Quoting from Trump's social media here, quote, "After a long night of talks mediated by the United States, I am pleased to announce that India and Pakistan have agreed to a full and immediate ceasefire." End quote. Any concern about the veracity of Trump's claim was quickly put to rest, with both the foreign ministries of India and Pakistan confirming shortly afterward that the nations had agreed earlier in the day to end the conflict. In what had been a major international effort, guarded carefully behind the scenes, nations from the UK to France to Turkey to Saudi Arabia to China had helped in the push toward peace, although it was the US that ultimately led the effort, according to both India and Pakistan after the fact. Just days after US Vice President J.D. Vance had claimed that the India-Pakistan crisis was, quote, "fundamentally none of our business," Vance and US Secretary of State Marco Rubio had been able to get both sides to the table amidst rising fears around the world that a nuclear exchange was becoming ever more likely. According to some sources, India had struck a location near the headquarters that manages Pakistan's nuclear arsenal in what seemed to be a threat by India to destroy the command structure that governs Pakistan's nuclear deterrence. India had struck a location near the headquarters that manages Pakistan's nuclear arsenal in what seemed to be a threat by India to destroy the command structure that governs Pakistan's nuclear deterrence. If true, and if Pakistan took corresponding action to ensure its deterrence survived, then the region may well have been just a few seconds from proverbial nuclear midnight. The ceasefire...
Jesus Christ. Because if you're... if you're going to engage in nuclear war, then the first thing you're going to do is try and bomb the areas where if the other side has nukes, that is able to send them. And so that seems risky.
Proved to be a shaky affair, and one that almost came undone within an hour of being publicly announced. In the Indian-administered cities of Jammu and Srinagar in disputed Kashmir, explosions rang out just minutes after India and Pakistan confirmed the truce. Small skirmishes kept up in a few locations across the line of control, while both the Indian region of Gujarat and the Pakistani city of Peshawar reported hostile drones in the sky. Another hostile drone situation would crop up a couple of days later over Kashmir. But when faced with the opportunity to ratchet up tensions again, or perhaps more accurately to bait the other side in doing so, both India and Pakistan ultimately decided against it. At the time of writing...
Yeah, when it comes to Kashmir, again, all of what I know right now is from those two documentaries I watched. I paid very well attention to them, and they were both very good. I forget the names of the channels. I should probably find them so I can tell you guys if you want to watch them. That a lot of the areas when they partitioned India and Pakistan, a lot of the areas along the present-day border were not through specific regions. They were with different regions on the other side. But when it came to Kashmir, they split it in two. And so that's why it makes sense that this is an area that is most vulnerable to escalation. If you know what I mean? If anyone knows more than me here, please let me know in the comments.
A couple of days later, over Kashmir. But when faced with the opportunity to ratchet up tensions again, or perhaps more accurately to bait the other side in doing so, both India and Pakistan ultimately decided against it. At the time of writing, in the pre-dawn hours of Wednesday, May the 14th, in India and Pakistan, the ceasefire has yet to break, and hopefully it'll remain in place for a very long time. In the immediate aftermath, both sides have taken stock of their reported losses while insisting that their adversary took more casualties than they're each willing to admit. Pakistan acknowledged the deaths of 11 of its soldiers and injuries of 78, as well as the deaths of over 40 civilians plus 120 injured. India claims that closer to 40 Pakistani soldiers were killed.
Right, both sides are going to want to claim to its citizens, or proclaim to its citizens that, they were, we're doing a ceasefire, but this wasn't embarrassing. In fact, we were the ones who ended up doing doing more damage than the other side. So it's really hard for me to take either side other than with a grain of salt. So I get that.
20 injured. India claims that closer to 40 Pakistani soldiers were killed, plus over 100 militants from the Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorist groups with whom Pakistan has maintained a shadowy but consistent relationship. On the other hand, India acknowledged the deaths of 5 soldiers and 21 civilians, with 59 other civilians injured, while Pakistan insisted that as many as 50 Indian soldiers had been killed. Other than human losses, each side claims to have destroyed significant military hardware and infrastructure, with Pakistan saying that it shot down 5 Indian fighter jets and damaged nearly 20 major bases, headquarters, and air defense systems, while India claims to have shot down several Pakistani jets, destroyed several air defense systems, and destroyed well over a dozen bases and other military targets. When it comes to the damage they suffered, however, both India and Pakistan have been unwilling to validate each other's claims. As of now, both sides continue to make progress toward a lasting truce. Each side's leadership has reiterated its commitment to the ceasefire and to reliance on diplomatic channels in order to resolve any future disputes that may arise, if at all possible. On Monday the 12th, the leaders of the two nations' militaries met to discuss outstanding issues and coordinate a mutual reduction of troops in Kashmir and other border areas. Both nations' economies have shown public confidence that the ceasefire can hold, and both have been able to successfully claim credit for a measured form of victory without running into any unusually fiery rhetoric from the other. Both sides are in a situation where it's far more convenient to allow the ceasefire to hold than to spark another round of hostilities, and if India and Pakistan follow where their own geopolitical incentives lead, then this crisis would appear to have been averted. Just before we continue with today's episode, do make sure you check out our newsletter. It keeps you right up to date with stuff that we don't necessarily get to cover on this channel, or stuff that is incredibly fast moving. We will have a link to it below. It's completely free, and I hope you enjoy it. But to say that India and Pakistan have resolved their immediate crisis is only half the story. Much like the mighty and strategically critical rivers of the disputed Kashmir region, tranquility at the water's surface can betray powerful and deadly currents rushing underneath, and in the aftermath of these deadly few days, the veneer of a successful ceasefire should not distract from the underlying reality. Not only could this ceasefire very easily turn out to be a brief pause in the violence rather than a definitive end, but it subtly lays the groundwork for a far more intense crisis that could be days or decades away. The obvious place to start is the immediate future of South Asia, where despite India and Pakistan's mutual agreement to stop shooting at each other, both nations are quite understandably on a hair trigger right now.
Yeah, I believe India has the ability to cut off. I remember the number 80% from the video I watched of India has the capability of diverting rivers or damming rivers if they want to. That would cut off something like 80% of Pakistan's either farmable or drinkable water. This is why I'm hesitant to sound too confident here, because I don't know a lot at all, but I do know that India is capable of severely cutting Pakistan's access to water because of their higher elevation in the rivers that flow from the Himalayas and India into Pakistan.
Neither Pakistan nor India have any great trust for one another's leadership, and neither nation has any reason to place a naive, short-sighted trust into the good intentions of their historic enemy. Particularly pressing for India is the need to deter Pakistan from allowing any more terror attacks on Indian territory or in India-controlled Kashmir. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi insisted as much on Monday, warning Pakistan that India would not hesitate to carry out cross-border attacks on terrorist infrastructure if there were any further attacks like the one in Pahalgam. India has blamed Pakistan directly for the Pahalgam attack in what ultimately became the pretext for these entire several days of hostilities. The precise connections between the Kashmir attack and the Pakistani government have not yet been mapped out, but Pakistan is understood to have long relied on and coordinated with terrorist organizations on its own soil, allegations that Pakistan has fiercely denied for a very long time. India has made it clear that it will not be forgiving toward Pakistan for future offensives.
Yeah, I have no idea if that's true or not. If it is true, Pakistan's going to deny it. If it isn't true, India could still insinuate it. And this goes for pretty much any conflict, whether it's Sudan, South Sudan, or Israel, Palestine, or Russia, Ukraine. No matter what side I might think is under attack rather than attacking, they're both going to have incentive to propagandize a bit to make themselves look better or the enemy look worse, or both. So,
Quoting Modi here, India will strike precisely and decisively at the terrorist hideouts developing under the cover of nuclear blackmail. There is, however, a potentially massive problem with India's line in the sand, namely that Pakistan may not be able to fully control those same organizations. We can compare the situation here to the situation in Iran, a nation that has long funded, supported, and coordinated with international terror organizations like Hamas, Hezbollah, and Yemen's Houthi rebels. Despite these groups being to some degree reliant on Iran, Iran does not have the ability to stop them from pursuing their own objectives and at times acting contrary to Iran's wishes when Iranian interests just don't line up with their own. The Houthi rebels in Yemen, for example, are widely understood to have continued their escalation with the US and Israel well after Iran began urging them to back down, fearing that Iran would be held directly responsible for Houthi attacks it wasn't ordering and could no longer control. Pakistan faces a similar risk where hardline extremist factions within Lashkar-e-Taiba or other groups could choose to launch terror attacks and force Pakistan's hand, knowing that India will hold Pakistan directly responsible and begin a cycle of escalation.
Exactly. If you want a conflict, if those terrorist groups in Pakistan want a conflict, and they know now that India will retaliate if they attack, even if Pakistan doesn't give them orders to do anything, they know, like, they're going to be blamed if we do, and so you have a free ticket to start a giant conflict if you want to. So I get what he's saying there.
Pakistan will then have to continue. India could, under the right circumstances, exercise some level of discretion in figuring out whether a future terror attack was ordered and facilitated by Pakistan or carried out by a rogue group trying to exploit Pakistan's position. But neither Modi's recent statements nor the longer history of conflict between these two nations would suggest that India would give Pakistan the benefit of the doubt. And then there are the outstanding issues that have yet to be resolved as part of the ceasefire arrangement. Most importantly, the Indus Waters Treaty. And we've spoken about the treaty extensively in past episodes, and even have an entire episode dedicated to it if you'd like to learn more. But to give you a general overview, the treaty grants Pakistan rights to water coming from several rivers that run through the Kashmir region. While India doesn't currently have the facilities to dam those rivers and divert large volumes of water, Pakistan depends on the rivers to grow most of its crops. And since India suspended the treaty a couple of weeks ago, it started work on projects that would allow it to cut off the flow of water in the future. As of now, the treaty has yet to go back into effect, and while Pakistan has insisted that India must come to the table in the coming weeks, it's important to emphasize that Pakistan has little to no leverage to get India there other than restarting hostilities. If India wants to create long-term leverage to control Pakistan and keep it in check in the future, then controlling and damming these rivers is by far the most effective way to do that without any further outright violence. Beyond the Indus Waters Treaty, India and Pakistan have yet to end the suspension of visas for each other's citizens, reopen the major land crossing that governs their shared borders, restart direct trade, or allow each other's diplomats back to their posts. Then there's the status of Kashmir region itself, where India and Pakistan will need to spend significant time and resources rebuilding villages that were destroyed in the violence. Even after reconstruction, both nations will need to figure out what they consider to be an appropriate level of militarization in the disputed zone, and after what's just happened, it's unlikely that each side will simply choose to return to pre-crisis deployments. Now that India and Pakistan have both done the work of getting military equipment in proximity to the line of control, it'll be easier to simply build the infrastructure than it would have been to navigate diplomatic pushback in a time of relative peace. And now that each side has such recent experience of a cross-border confrontation, they'll likely seek to change the composition of equipment that they keep there in order to prioritize weapons and defensive systems that proved especially helpful and get rid of the ones that became liabilities. India in particular faces larger strategic headwinds on the global stage now that the ceasefire has gone into effect. While India ultimately did accept the international assistance of the United States and many other nations in mediating the conflict, the relief of a short-term ceasefire came with a price. For decades, India has worked to project the image of a strong, strategically autonomous, diplomatically unencumbered nation, and one that was more than capable of dealing with Pakistan on its own terms, in its own time, and in its own way. According to sources within the Indian government speaking to global media, the overarching frustration now is that India's image has been undercut and that New Delhi was forced to rely on America, China, Europe, and even the petrostates of the Middle East in order to reach a solution. That, on top of perceptions within India's government that the US mismanaged their own intervention, first failing to understand the significance of what was happening, then panicking because of an overstated threat of nuclear Pakistan, and then unilaterally announcing a ceasefire without India's agreement. For Narendra Modi, who's worked hard to cultivate an independent, strongman-style image on the world stage, the circumstances of the ceasefire are a high-profile embarrassment. To be specific, they're an embarrassment in which India's losses of military aircraft were made public. Its argument for responding with force against Pakistan was delegitimized, and claims around its ability to handle its neighbor were revealed to be false. That doesn't just matter because it's a black mark against Modi. It matters because India's hardliners, including many in its government, will likely see a path to rehabilitate its image by taking decisive and escalatory action against Pakistan in the future, perhaps even militarily. So even though the situation in India and Pakistan has been calmed down in the short term, there are a whole range of problems left to be confronted. Those include not just potential flashpoints that could set the conflict off again, but accelerants, diplomatic, military, or public relations factors that could pour fuel on the fire. For that reason, it'll be especially important for both nations to stay engaged in a longer peace and de-escalation process, and if either or both nations decline to do so, then that should be taken as a warning to the world. The next time this happens, things could get far worse.
Yeah, unfortunately, the protecting the ego of you and your country could override the threat of a possible nuclear war, which might sound insane, but seems pretty par for the course for humans in general.
Stepping back from the immediate aftermath of the crisis, the flare-up between India and Pakistan comes with real strategic and tactical insights for the future, both for the two nations that were directly involved and for the rest of the world. First and foremost is the extensive use of drone warfare by both participating nations. The crisis constituted the first time in history that two nuclear nations have engaged in a conflict involving modern drone warfare, and both India and Pakistan drew on a whole range of drone technologies to get the job done. Each side utilized UAVs for surveillance, to launch precision strikes, to jam enemy signals, to collect electronic intelligence, and to launch one-way kamikaze strikes. On one particular occasion, on May the 9th, Pakistan launched nearly 500 drones in a massive swarm, penetrating deep into Indian territory, collecting immense amounts of data after some of the drones triggered a response from Indian air defenses, forcing them to reveal their locations and enabling subsequent strikes to take them out. The comprehensive use of drone equipment in a conflict that saw few, if any, manned vehicles or aircraft make a meaningful cross into enemy territory revealed just how much a complex crisis like this can rely solely on drone technology. That's highly relevant for future conflicts.
What?
A response from Indian air defenses, forcing them to reveal their locations and enabling subsequent strikes to take them out. The comprehensive use of drone equipment in a conflict that saw few, if any, manned vehicles or aircraft make a meaningful cross into enemy territory revealed just how much a complex crisis like this can rely solely on drone technology.
Reveal just how much as how little?
That's highly relevant for future conflicts, both because it indicates a method of war fighting that India and Pakistan are likely to go back to, and because it seemed to offer both sides more leeway in accepting setbacks or shoot-downs without pursuing the nuclear option. Many dozens of drones were shot down on either side, and those losses were tolerated, albeit begrudgingly, with the two sides still able to quickly pursue a ceasefire. The same probably couldn't be said if it was many dozens of manned fighter aircraft being shot down instead. And speaking of fighter aircraft,
yeah, true.
The manned air war between India and Pakistan gave major insights into how modern top-of-the-line aircraft perform in a face-off. On India's side, the most relevant technology at play was the French-made Rafale fighter jet, as well as the pan-European air-to-air missile, the Meteor. On Pakistan's side was China's new J-10C fighter jet, utilizing two Chinese air-to-air missiles, the PL-12 and the PL-15. On the one hand, recovered technology will likely be scrutinized by all sides, with at least one Chinese-made air-to-air missile recovered intact on the ground, along with missile and drone debris. On the other, the claims that Pakistan was able to shoot down multiple Rafale fighters and the confirmation that at least one fighter was lost have been taken in some corners as a victory for the Chinese J-10. We've said it before on this channel, we'll say it again. A shoot-down of the Rafale, even multiple shoot-downs, is highly contingent on...
You know what I had to bring myself back from right there? is part of me started to think like, wait, Chinese weapons being used by Pakistan on India, oh, that's a problem. But then I'm like, well, American weapons are used all the time in conflicts, and I don't have that thought. Sometimes I'm surprised by my own bias, even though I try to not be biased. I'm sometimes surprised about it, and I'm like, oh yeah, why do I have this reaction, but not with China, but not with the USA? It's a constant learning experience that I have with myself, you know.
A lot of context that the world simply doesn't have, at least not yet. As such, it's really too early to make pronouncements that a certain fighter jet or missile is better than its foreign counterpart, when anything from pilot training to human error to technical defects to the mitigating factor of air defenses or any other extraneous variable might have influenced outcomes. But as that information becomes available, rest assured that global intelligence will be very interested in learning about it, even if some details are
True.
never revealed to the public. In the air, and also on the ground, the confrontation between India and Pakistan revealed the importance of physical terrain, and specifically sovereign territory, in averting unexpected escalations. Because both nations' air forces are in possession of long-range missiles and drones, neither India nor Pakistani aircraft had to actually cross into each other's territory to score hits, including, in what some sources report, was a massive air battle involving some 125 fighter aircraft between both nations, fought using long-range air-to-air weapons as each respective air force kept to their own nation's territory. Over and above the value of avoiding an embarrassing capture of a pilot, as India has experienced in past flare-ups with Pakistan, that decision to keep to their own territory ensured that only unmanned systems were delivering damage within India or Pakistan. The same was true for ground forces, with India and Pakistan both sticking mostly to their own soil and launching artillery barrages across the line of control. That territorial divide is something that may not, on its face, seem as if it would be important. But as it played out in real time, the actions of both India and Pakistan would indicate that they agreed. A land or air invasion of each other's territory was a bridge that wasn't worth crossing, even when direct strikes on each other's territory were perfectly permissible. In South Asia, these findings and others will help both sides figure out how they can wage war in the future. The rules that were informally established in this conflict will probably be treated as precedents in future exchanges, with the lines that weren't crossed this time around being treated as significant if they are crossed in a later flare-up. Around the world, other nations will work to pick apart any data they can from this exchange, to measure the performance of certain technologies, to analyze what India and Pakistan could or couldn't get away with in antagonizing a nuclear adversary, and more. Those findings may become especially important over the next few years, with Russia and the nuclear nations of Europe eyeing each other from opposite sides of the Ukrainian border.
I wonder if that makes a next conflict safer or less safe than the first one. I feel like the first conflict is always the most scary, or the first conflict or the first engagement, because you really have not much precedent or recent precedent to see how it's going to go. But also the next conflict is added on to the first conflict, but at least there's some knowledge about how the two parties are going to react, and so maybe there's a less chance of the second conflict being as risky of all-out nuclear war than the first one. Do you know what I'm trying to say? I feel like I didn't explain that very well.
And China and the United States getting ready to square up in the Pacific. And finally, we've got to pay at least brief respects to the way that the crisis has changed the complexion of future battles between India and Pakistan. Although the situation was ultimately resolved without deteriorating into a major war, this most recent crisis in South Asia is going to rewrite the rules of future armed engagements in the same region. Now that India and Pakistan have learned that they can engage in exchanges of this magnitude and still avoid a larger war, they have little incentive not to take similar steps in a future conflict.
Well, again, with the same thing I was trying to say 10 seconds ago, is that just because it didn't happen before doesn't mean that doing it twice won't have the same result, right? That doesn't make much sense. It's like, well, I hit him one time and then he hit me back. Like, I hit him one time, nothing really happened. So I can just keep hitting him and nothing will happen. That's not logical. Sometimes, like, you can have a turning point. It's like, all right, you hit me 3 times. Oh, but I hit you 3 times in the same way I hit you the first time. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
In a practical sense, that means that future conflicts will likely reach this level of intensity more easily, and it'll be the lines drawn in
Or you
this
inch
conflict
further.
that will be crossed in the next. While it may be frustrating for casual observers who want to understand strategy and geopolitics, it was a good thing that India and Pakistan didn't know what would happen when they were crossing new boundaries in this conflict. Greater uncertainty about how the other side will respond when the other side has nuclear weapons leads to greater restraint. Now, both sides will have greater latitude in the future conflict before having to consider restraint again. Thank you for watching.
Great video. I learned a bit. I really want to find the 2 longer videos I watched so I can tell you guys about it. Maybe if I watch another video about this topic, I'll try and find it in the meantime. But what was I going to say?
It's to greater restraint. Now, both sides, when the other side has new...
Oh, right, I remember. So it'll be a game of, like, seeing what happened in this first engagement. Hopefully it's the last engagement for a while, but very well could not be the case. Then you're probably going to have to keep inching forward in your response to see how the other side reacts. Because when you have a nation, 2 nations that are fighting and they both have nukes, you don't want to do something drastic that might make the other side just press the button, you know? And so if the conflict does go on, I'm assuming the next time it'll be slightly more drastic than the first time. And then if that doesn't cause more, I think they'll keep kind of testing the waters, both sides in that way. When it comes to the terrorist groups in Pakistan, I think the most worrying thing is giving them the power to now decide the next conflict. And I get what India is trying to do, but you're also doing that in saying, you know, if you attack again, then it's game on. Well, even if Pakistan did encourage the terror attack to happen by a terrorist group in their country on India, well, the next time, even if they say no, the side might be like, well, it doesn't matter what you tell us because India is going to think you told us to, whether you tell us or not. And so now the ball is in the terrorist group's court, whether or not to continue this conflict, which isn't great. But I don't have a good solution, so it's hard for me to really criticize. So, interesting video. Love y'all. Hope you're all doing well. Would appreciate any comments down below. If you disagree with something I said, let me know. Answer any of my questions. You guys are always great with that. Any comments at all. And hopefully I'll see you guys next time. We'll keep on learning. Bye, guys.